Hello everyone, and in this video, while I was originally going to talk about Digimon Tamers and start my retrospective series today, I actually found myself listening to my first ever Digimon podcast yesterday when I was at work, just because I kind of wanted to see how I used to cover the anime and see if I can grab any ideas from how I started, basically, and sort of go back to the basics and back to my beginnings when I first started the podcast 6 years ago now. And there were a few differences, mainly because when I started the podcast, I was almost 22, I still lived with my parents, and I just started my first full-time job after graduating, so that was a few months before I started the podcast. And besides the fact that I'm no longer a 21-year-old fresh-faced person that I was back then, I found that a few of my interests in the series, as well as my favourite things about the series, had changed. Primarily how I would rank the series, which is just wild to me. And it's very much how, I guess, we look back on ourselves and back on how we enjoy media. And a lot of my rankings and how I would enjoy the series was taken from liking the series and growing up with the series, and how I originally thought about the series when I was growing up watching Digimon for the first time. So first of all, I had put Tamers as my favourite series, which, nothing really wrong with that. It's an interesting one because it is probably the series that I liked, I liked it, but I didn't really get into it as much when I was a kid. But I had rewatched it the most recently when I was first starting this podcast, so it was kind of fresh in my mind. So it makes sense that Tamers would be first, and also a lot of people would probably agree that it is probably it's up there for them too, and it's still up there for my favourite shows as well. So then there was second place, which was 02. Now, this is because when I was a kid, 02 was my favourite. 02 is definitely the series that has the most amount of nostalgia to me, and it's something I really do like. I really do like 02. But when we actually went around to watching and discussing 02 on the podcast, we had a lot of complaints about it because I guess it didn't live up to what I remembered of it when I watched it as a kid. And while 02 has a very, very nice place in my heart and a very wonderful, warm place of love for that series, looking back on it, not really as much, no. And then what is just absolutely wild to me is the fact that in third place, and this completely surprised me, even though this was only 6 years ago, which isn't that long ago. I mean, long in terms of the internet, and long in terms of how my life has changed in 6 years. But anyway, so it was only 6 years ago. I put, Frontier in, third place. And when we went to cover it in the podcast, that's probably the show that we had the most amount of complaints about. Definitely the series we had the most negative things to say. And to this day, I have a lot of negative things to say about Frontier. Primarily the fact of the treatment of the main female character who has her evolution episode and loses in it. And basically, and that's in episode 6, that's basically seals her fate as not a very good character in the series, and that's the only female character. I don't know how I managed to put that in third place. It was absolutely wild to me. So then in fourth place I had Adventure, which I have no problem. The Adventure is very much just in the middle of my rankings always. It's very much, it's like the baseline of Digimon, because it was their first series. They didn't really, they didn't have anywhere to go. They didn't have anywhere to, it was a starting point. So Adventure's not that, it's not surprising that it's in the middle, because it probably stayed the same. And that's the thing with Adventure, it's very much, it's always in the same position in terms of my ranking. While some people say it's their favourite season, that's fine. I put it sort of in the middle, so it doesn't surprise me that Adventure is there. However, and then, this is the place that's wild to me, because I was like, oh wait, I haven't mentioned Savers yet. And then I said, 6 years ago me said, oh, I'm not sure if I prefer Savers or Cross Wars more. And that part was just like, oh no. Because now, I would put Savers in probably second place, with Tamers in third place, and sometimes those two might sort of switch between each other, because I do like Savers, but I do like Tamers. Like, I think Tamers is pretty good as a show. It is a lot more than the other seasons were. And even thinking, like, saying, oh, Savers is in second. I would actually, yes, Savers is in third, actually. I changed my mind because I was thinking about how I'm rewatching Tamers now for the retrospective podcast. Well, not podcast, retrospective video series, I should say. And I'm just sitting here thinking, oh, Savers could do a little bit more, and Tamers does do that little bit extra. And then in first place, obviously, we have Atmon. However, of course, because the first episode of the podcast was recorded in 2015, that was before Atmon was released. In fact, I believe it was I listened to a few of the first few episodes of the podcast, and I said how, I think it was episode 2 or 3, I was like, oh, we have some news. Digimon Tri has a release date. It's actually going to be 6 episodes, not a full 50-episode season. So we just found out about that. So there was no Atmon. Tri had just been released, or just been announced, rather. It hadn't been released yet. And yeah, so that was sort of where that first chunk of episodes the podcast starts. Tri's just been announced. Atmon hasn't been announced or released or whatever. It's just so far in the future, I don't even know about it yet. And that's obviously, so Atmon can't be in the ranking there. But it is so wild to me that I would put Frontier so high up. And I think that's because I do have a lot of nostalgia for Frontier. And that's the power of nostalgia. Frontier was the show that I actually played with the Digivice toy before I actually watched the show. And it was just, I thought the Digivice toy was really fun. And I really liked the idea that they were becoming the Digimon. It felt like more of a magical girl anime, which I was pretty into. And I really loved that as a kid. And I guess when I was doing the podcast, I hadn't actually rewatched Frontier. Like, I think the last time I watched Frontier before I went on to say it was my third favourite season, apparently, was probably when I was about 14. So I hadn't actually rewatched it since then. And I don't think I actually finished the whole show when I was a kid. I was mainly going on the nostalgia of the Digivice toy. So that was definitely why I put it up in third place. But when we went to see it for the podcast a few years later, after we released our first episode, I guess I was just disappointed. So yeah, I would not put Frontier in first place. I think it goes like Atmon and then Tamers. Yeah, I think Tamers will put in second place. That's how I'm feeling today. I'll probably, like, in another 6 years, I'll watch this video and I'm like, actually, but for now, I'll put Tamers in second place, Savers in third, and then this is where it gets kind of hard. I think in fourth place, I think Adventure can stay in fourth place. After that, I think I want to put Cross Wars as an entirety, so all 3 seasons of Cross Wars I would put under Adventure. I think if we were just putting the first 2 seasons of Cross Wars, that would go above Adventure, with probably like the second season of Cross Wars being above the first. So it would go like Cross Wars season 1, Cross Wars season 2, Adventure, Cross Wars season 1, and then Fusion. Oh, it's not Fusion, Young Hunters. And then, but I'm not sure about season 1 of Cross Wars and Adventure. They might be kind of like on the same level. But yeah, I would, all of Cross Wars together, as in all 3 seasons, I would put under Adventure. And then after that, I think I'd put 02 just under there, but I definitely think I might have liked 02 more than Young Hunters. But Young Hunters is fine. Like, I don't have a problem with Young Hunters. So yeah, let's put 02 underneath Cross Wars. And then I think I would say Frontier. Yes. So quite different to how I put the series in ranking in when I was first doing the podcast. In terms of where I would put Colin, I think I would probably put that also around the middle. It's definitely had a lot of problems, but it also is a fine series. I enjoy it. I think I would enjoy it more if I didn't have to analyze it each week, if I was just watching it and it was just watching it for fun rather than analysing it, I probably enjoyed a lot more, and I think that is probably true for a lot of seasons of Digimon. So that one would probably be hanging out around in the middle, but it hasn't finished yet, so I can't really judge it. In terms of Try, probably... I know the problem with Try is it's 6 movies, not one whole series. But if it was a series, I think I'd probably put it under Colon, I think. It's hard because I really, really loved the first 3 seasons of Try. And that's another thing that's wild from the podcast, so I'm really excited for Try. And then I remember when Atmon was announced, I was like, Atmon doesn't sound very good, but Try is really good. And then, of course, by the time that Atmon finished and Try finished, I was definitely more sold on Atmon, because I liked the first 3 the first 3 parts of Try, but then 4, 5, and 6 I wasn't really a big fan of. And so yeah, I think I'd put Try, like, I guess in the middle as well. Probably under Adventure. And probably under Colon as well, maybe. So yeah, so that's sort of how things change and how nostalgia kind of like skews our perspective of how we enjoy things. But it was just kind of wild. And the other thing of watching these, listening to these old podcasts was that I just felt like this was a different person that was talking about Digimon completely. It was kind of weird to feel like this is actually, that was me. That was me talking with those feelings about Digimon. And I felt so separated. Besides the fact I put Frontier in 3rd place, which is still absolutely, absolutely wild to me. And yeah, I just felt so separated from this person. It didn't even feel like I was listening to myself. It felt like I was listening to this other person. And the main point I just want to finish off this video on is the fact that I thought this episode, like, looking back on it before I listened to it, I thought that the podcast was not good to start with. I thought the first chunk of episodes, like, whenever someone said, can I listen to your podcast? Like, yeah, but you can skip the first couple of episodes because we were new to it, they're not very good, and just listening back, they're not that bad at all. Like, I'm not going to say that they're the best thing, the best podcasts ever, and everyone should listen to them because they're the best, and I'm the best at everything. No, I'm just surprised that they weren't quite as terrible as I remembered. And that's something that also, I guess, comes with it's 6 years in the past, and I am 28 now, and I was almost 22 when I started the podcast. So it was it's kind of like this is a completely different person. I'm so separated from this person that did this, and also this podcast isn't as nearly as bad as I thought. So if you haven't listened to the podcast before, if you're just coming on to watching these videos about the virtual pets, or if you've just been watching my later coverage on Digimon Adventure Colon, I actually do recommend that you go back and actually listen to the entire podcast, because we did every single episode of Digimon and we covered it in English and Japanese, so we compared the differences. So that was another thing that I feel like really went for the podcast, because not a lot of people were doing that. Like, everyone was doing a Digimon podcast at the time, but no one was actually comparing it between the English and Japanese versions, because there are differences. So definitely check them out, because they haven't actually aged badly. And except for the fact I put Frontier in 3rd place, that is still absolutely completely wild to me. So yeah, that's how I just wanted to do a quick video on the... And yes, it's completely vain of me, like, oh yes, I'm going to do a video about myself, oh. No, it's actually just surprising about how not terrible it was, but also how wild. Like, I put Frontier in 3rd. I'm completely just amazed by that fact. Anyway, so thanks for watching this episode, and hey, go check out that podcast, or all the podcasts if you want, because they're not terrible, and that's honestly surprising to me, except for the third place Frontier. What was I thinking? Anyway, so thanks for watching this video, and I will see you on the next one. Bye!